Batman Beyond was a badass reinvention of the classic superhero. It was, simply said, totally shway. But you probably already know that if you're here at the Watchtower Database, a YouTube channel almost totally dedicated to the DC animated universe that launched in 1992 with Batman the Animated Series. Batman Beyond was not just a spiritual successor, but a direct follow-up to BTAS with the same showrunners and voice cast whenever possible. Though most of the time, the series ventured into new territory with original villains, because let's be honest, nobody wanted to see a geriatric Gotham City overrun by Grandpa Penguin or a retired Riddler. Even though the producers planned to steer away from classic Batman villains, many of the new baddies in Batman Beyond were either inspired by or adapted from pre-existing characters throughout Batman's storied publication history. Today I'm investigating which Batman Beyond villains have ties to present-day Batman mythos, which classic members of Bruce Wayne's rogues gallery persisted into the future, and funny enough, which of Terry McGinnis' futuristic foes' namesakes eventually found their way into the mainstream DC universe. Subscribe bumper.
Showtime, everybody!
Engagement.
They can talk all they like.
That means everything.
Don't forget that. You heard it, folks!
Right off the bat, sorry, I can't help but say that when covering a Batman topic, which is like almost every video. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite Beyond villain, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I know you, specifically yes, you haven't yet, so do it now. Just do it now. Just do it. What are you waiting for? Just do it. In Bruce Timm's volume of the Modern Masters art book series, the producer was asked if there was a mandate in place, with a few exceptions, that stated no classic Batman villains were allowed in Batman Beyond.
That was something that Glenn and I pushed for. Unfortunately, most people agreed, just because we really wanted to establish that this was an all-new character. We felt it would be really easy to just update all the old villains, but we wanted the show to be unique upon itself. We wanted it to have its own unique mythos and feel. Just bringing back old villains and updating and futurizing them, we felt it was too simple and a cheat. So what we wanted to do was come up with classic Batman-style villains. We talked about this previously, that there's a certain kind of Batman-ness to all the Batman villains. They're all kind of like Dick Tracy villains, with the bizarre visual and the bizarre psychological kink.
And there were some pretty weird Dick Tracy baddies. Take Flat Top Jones or Littleface, for example.
Unlike the Batman animated series, we didn't have the classic rogues gallery to fall back on, and so we had to come up with characters that were new but were just as compelling. It was a very hard show to do from that standpoint.
And Bruce pulled all the artists who could do it into a room and said, we need villains. He basically just threw it out there. Basically developed the show in a room, and we were just throwing out ideas out there and literally just drawing.
So everyone on the Batman Beyond crew started coming up with ideas for original villains.
Artists would just sit down and start drawing concepts. Glenn Murakami and James Tucker both did sheets and sheets and sheets of different villain concepts without even really knowing exactly what they were, just drawing interesting designs. A lot of the villains from the show came about that way. Of course, some villains came the opposite way, with writers having a villain idea and then artists needing to come up with the visual for them.
We just had to generate a lot of artwork really quickly. We would kind of go into a meeting and we would like sort of throw out a bunch of drawings, and then we would start shaping what the show was.
Stan Berkowitz corroborated in a 2006 interview with The World's Finest that many of the villains, including Shriek and Inque, were drawings first, and the writers were then told to figure out origins for them. Having the image right in front of you really helps the creative process.
I wanted this show to be Terry's show. I didn't want Terry necessarily to be fighting all of Bruce's villains. I didn't think that was interesting.
However, the traditional Batman's rogues gallery were never far from their minds.
So we wanted to use the classic Batman villain archetypes, but put different spins on them. Thus you get Inque, who's a shapeshifter. But other than that, she has no relation to Clayface. She has a different motive, she has a different feel, she's sexy, she's liquidy, she's not a big pile of crap, you know?
Or refried beans, which we all know is what Old Spicy Clayboy was really made of. We here at the Watchtower Database have a little headcanon fan theory that Inque may have had her DNA spliced with the Imperium from the Justice League animated series.
This guy is the Imperium. These guys are unnamed drone soldiers, weird, squishy, white alien things.
Whatever the case, there's no way the DCAU writers and producers could have made that connection in Batman Beyond, since it was produced 2 years before Justice League's premiere, but still a fun visual nod in Inque's design that works well with her power set.
James Tucker had just drawn this interesting blobby character. We went, wow, what the hell is that? And came up with the backstory afterwards.
Derek Powers, essentially the Norman Osborn to Terry McGinnis' Peter Parker, was somewhat retroactively folded into the DC universe, or at least his family name name was. Maria Powers and her husband Joseph, co-owners of the Powers Hotel, were interrogated by Batman for their participation in the Court of Owls in Batman number 10 from 2012 during Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman comic run from the New 52. Later in the Super Heavy arc, Jerry Powers, an executive of Powers Tech, was introduced. She was responsible for creating the robotic bat suit worn by Jim Gordon, dubbed by fans at the time as Bat-Chappie after the 2015 film, well, Chappie. Hopefully that was obvious. Derek's father, who would have been known as Warren Powers, was supposed to appear in Batman Adventures Volume 2, number 15, but his role was eventually written out. Powers was intended to be a red herring in the Red Hood story arc, and his wife, Derek's mother, was to be revealed as, well, someone no one would have expected. It was a super creative idea. For more on all that craziness, check out our video on what could have been if Batman Adventures Volume 2 hadn't been canceled too soon. In less than 2 episodes, Derek Powers became the villain Blight, who not only shares a moniker with the Justice League Dark antagonist from the New 52's Forever Evil Blight storyline, but essentially looks exactly like the classic Bat villain Dr. Phosphorus. They even have the same powers. Get it? Like, Derek Powers has powers? Okay. The Batman Beyond Files book literally wrote, Blight is a skeleton who glows green like phosphorus, so don't you try to tell me otherwise. Plus, Bruce Timm already confirmed it.
Blight is totally Dr. Phosphorus. I mean, come on. But that was just a total gimme because we had never done Dr. Phosphorus in the animated series, and I'd always kind of liked that visual. There was that one story that Walt Simonson had done back in the 70s, and I always really liked that. So we said, okay, we'll do Dr. Phosphorus, but we'll change his name and his origin story, but you'll have the same kind of visual.
That Walt Simonson story was Dr. Phosphorus' debut in Detective Comics number 469 and 470, where the villain was originally Dr. Alex Sartorius, a member of the Tobacconists Club with Rupert Thorne. Sartorius wanted to construct a nuclear plant in the city, but was forced to build further out of town. After a plant meltdown, Sartorius' skin mutated to burn on contact and show his translucent skeleton. He vowed revenge on Gotham, dubbed himself Dr. Phosphorus, and had a showdown with Batman back at the plant, before falling into a reactor, presumed dead, until he came back. Modifying the origin but keeping the same kind of visual was also a creative move accomplished for the Royal Flush Gang, though the villains still retained their name and design aesthetic.
I always kind of liked the look of those characters in the comics, but we never really had the chance to use them before. Even though they're existing DC characters, they're new to animation.
Not true, Mr. Tim. The Royal Flush Gang appeared in the Super Friends episode, The Wild Cards. I got you. Tim went on to say that, being a generational supergroup that just keeps on going, the Royal Flush Gang were linked to the old show, even though they never appeared in the old show. While it is true that the Royal Flush Gang never appeared in Beat Task, they had a notable introduction in Justice League's Wild Cards episode, with Ace returning for JLU's epilogue. Other variations of the gang were also in the associated tie-in comics. Batman Beyond's design for the RFG found its way into All-Star Batman number 3 in 2016, where the team tried to collect a bounty on Batman and Two-Face before the KG Beast blew them out of his way. This version reappeared in The Flash number 62, working alongside Roulette. Now let's talk about the Bane-sized elephant in the room, or rather the elephant-sized Bane. Despite the showrunners looking to avoid the original Rogues Gallery, the classic Batman villain appeared in Batman Beyond's The Winning Edge episode as a potential suspect for the reemergence of the Venom drug, which is being mass distributed throughout Neo-Gotham.
Bane. I wasn't really thrilled about using Bane, but at least he wasn't the same old Bane that he used to be. He was a wheelchair-bound invalid, so that was okay.
Leave it to Bane to evoke advocacy for disability awareness. Anyway, you know what Tim meant. So, Bane wasn't the only classic villain to appear in Season 1 of Batman Beyond. Meltdown featured Mr. Freeze in a battle of fire and ice against Blight. Batman the Anime series originally reimagined Mr. Freeze for the modern era in the Emmy Award-winning episode Heart of Ice, the Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero animated movie, and countless other unforgettable moments in the DCAU.
The only, at least in the first go-round, actual Batman villain that we used was Mr. Freeze. I always had a soft spot for Mr. Freeze, and I watched the story development of that one very, very carefully.
Potentially because Tim felt slighted that Sub-Zero happened without his input, and erased his White Christmas short story in the Batman Adventures Holiday Special from canon. But that's a story for a different video, and something I did cover in graphic content, and also brought up in our Holiday Nights comic cartoon comparison video. But maybe I'm just reading into things, and Tim was just excited to revisit a fan fave character.
Visually, it gave us a chance to redesign him once again. So for Batman Beyond, we said, well, how do we futurize Mr. Freeze? In the meantime, Kelly Jones is one of the regular Batman artists in the comics, and he had come up with an interesting design for Mr. Freeze where he had a giant robot kind of look, and he lit the inside of the helmet so that his face was always backlit, so he had a blown out silhouetted face. We incorporated that into our new design and came up with yet another really cool Mr. Freeze design.
The original design for the Mr. Freeze of the future, as drawn by Glenn Murakami, seemed to provide the foundation for the original villain Shriek. I mean, you see it too, right?
Shriek was developed that way. That was just something Glenn had doodled.
Basically, Glenn drew the picture, and then I was just handed, the picture, and Alan said, "Here, Glenn just did this. It has something to do with sound. Figure out something."
Shriek doesn't share a name or anything with previous Bat villains, though Bruce Wayne occasionally fought another sound-based villain, Onomatopoeia, originally created by Kevin Smith during his run on Green Arrow. Onomatopoeia doesn't have a fancy sound suit. He just said sound effects out loud before they happened. It was kind of a cool gimmick for a comic book in 2002, 3 years after Shriek's premiere. But for their similar sound motifs, Onomatopoeia is one of the only villains I plan to mention today who was created post-Batman Beyond. Spellbinder appeared multiple times in Batman Beyond, but first in Spellbound. Ira Billings was a disgraced high school psychologist who used mind control for criminal pursuits. The DC Comics version was Delbert Billings, who first appeared in Detective Comics number 358 in 1966. He was a painter who used optical illusions and hypnosis in his crimes. Other than sharing the same codename, he had little in common with the Beyond iteration, who took more influence from Scarecrow and the Mad Hatter. Spellbinder also appeared in the Batman anime series as a present-day villain in the episode The Butler Did It, where he had a third eye, which allowed him to induce hallucinations. He posed as a photographer at a charity event where he manipulated Alfred to steal from Wayne. None of that was DCAU, but hey, was Spellbinder. As of the recording of this video, the Cult of Cobra have only been seen on screen in the DCAU's future from Batman Beyond, but they were revealed to exist in the present day in Justice League Adventures number 23, as well as several references in Batman The Adventures Continue. Perhaps this version is more like the classic cult as seen in Batman Soul of the Dragon, led by Jeffrey Burr with Lady Eve's assistants, rather than the nameless leaders that we saw in Batman Beyond, with various sects around the world. The Stalker was a skilled African hunter who first targeted Terry in Bloodsport, and later forged an unlikely alliance with the hero in Plague to stop Cobra from releasing a virus.
I was interested in creating a unique character. I suppose on some level, since I was very familiar with the Spider-Man and Kraven the Hunter thing, that was kicking around in my head, but I wasn't consciously trying to copy that. I was trying to come up with a villain that would present a challenge to Batman.
Batman producer Michael Uslan is on record for wanting to see an animated version of Night of the Stalker from Detective Comics number 439, where Batman doesn't say a single word, which he regards as one of the most emotionally impactful Batman stories of all time. He expressed interest, however, not as an actual producer with inside knowledge, but only in a fanboy sense. He shared the comic with Tim Burton, who took influence for the opening scene of Batman 89. Ra's al Ghul and sorta kinda his daughter Talia reappeared in Batman Beyond Season 3 episode Out of the Past, which was not only beloved by fans, but one of Tim's faves as well. The World's Finest asked Stan Berkowitz if there were any villains he would have liked to bring back from the BTAS era into Batman Beyond. He answered, only Killer Croc, and only because reptiles have such long lifespans that KC could still be active 50 years from now, whenever now is. Of course, the Joker himself returned in Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. Come on, it's earned a title. You know what you're in for. Early in the production process, once the creative team of Paul Dini and Bruce Timm decided to make an animated feature film set in Batman Beyond, they realized for the effort to work, they'd have to bring back the Joker. This made sense from a narrative standpoint to pit Terry McGinnis against Batman's most dangerous archenemy, and prove with absolute certainty that McGinnis was a worthy successor to the Mask. The Joker always had plenty of costumed clown help throughout the DCAU, in episodes like BTAS The Last Laugh, Henchman Mo, Lar, and Current in the new Batman Adventures, and as recently as the crew featured in Batman The Adventures Continue Season 1. But the Jokers are different. They're not simply henchmen working for the boss, but each clown their own spiritual sequel, as explained further in the Batman Beyond files.
The Jokers take their name and attitude from the villainous Joker. Though his days of terrorizing Gotham ended more than 20 years ago, the Clown Prince of Crime has not been forgotten. Then, he was Batman's deadliest enemy. Now, he is the inspiration for a new generation of mischief makers.
However, out of all the Jokers featured in Batman Beyond, the gang from the Return of the Joker were the most memorable, including members like Bonk, Chucko, the DD Twins, Woof, and Ghoul, the last of which having visual nods to the Scarecrow. Batman 89 recently carried on the Joker's tradition, in issue number 1 with the Joker Gang, that included its version of Prince as the Joker from the Party Man music video, as well as the DD Twins, who in Batman Beyond were sisters implied to be the granddaughters of Harley Quinn. However, in Future State The Next Batman number 2, Dee Dee appeared in a singular form as a domestic droid who joined Catwoman and Poison Ivy in their hideout from the Magistrate's forces. Alright, the rest of this is going to be more of a lightning round, since the connections to pre-existing present-day Batman stuff is a little looser, and I just don't have as much to say. Powers Tech goon Mr. Fix looked so cool to only be featured in Rebirth with little backstory, but Justice League Beyond number 17 showed an encounter between Batman and the man who would become Mr. Fix, involved in corporate sabotage decades earlier. A batarang lodged into the villain's eye, explaining how he got the notable scar, though Batman Beyond 2.0 number 7 also showed that he was responsible for coordinating the team behind Warren McGinnis' death, though this is only pseudo-canon from the Earth 12 continuity. In the episode Golem, Terry fought a scrawny teenager in a mech suit, but Detective Comics number 631 by Peter Milligan and Jim Aparo in 1991, Bruce Wayne encountered the Golem of Gotham. After an old Jewish man who survived World War II was assaulted with hate crimes, the man used a magical book to summon a being made of clay that would protect him and the other victims of the rising violence in the district, but the Golem was fueled by hate and went on a rampage. Batman eventually convinced the old man to destroy the monster. While the terrific trio plagued Terry McGinnis a time and a half, more on that soon in a future video, Batman never did encounter their original inspiration, the Fantastic Four, in any intercompany crossover, but Superman did. He teamed up with Marvel's First Family to fight Galactus and Cyborg Superman in 1999's Superman Fantastic Four: The Infinite Destruction by Dan Jurgens. But I'll raise you the terrible trio episode of BTAS if you really want a Bat connection. One team was terrific, one was terrible. You know the difference. Karari was a member of the Society of Assassins, which is not to be confused with the League of Assassins or Society of Shadows. Similar, but not quite the same. James isn't the only one who gets to do that. She was another character that Glenn Murakami doodled first and came up with the story for later. Check out our video on Lady Shiva, after you finish this one, for more on the assassin societies, leagues, and groups. An origin story for Green Lantern Beyond, aka Cairo, showed the girl who would become Karari as a pupil of the monks in Nana Parbat, where Bruce Wayne visited in his youth to train with the Master, per JLU's Dead Reckoning. Abel Cuvier was the genetics expert behind the splicing phenomenon of manipulating human DNA to have animal traits, first introduced in Splicers. He appeared in a flashback panel from 2018's Harley Loves Joker number 1 with Emil Dorian, the creator of Tigress from BTAS's Tiger Tiger episode. According to Evan Dorkin, the character's co-creator was Sarah Dyer, Cuvier was originally intended to be the son of one of Kirk Langstrom's lab assistants, creating a man-bat connection. More on him in a few. One of the main splicers in that same episode was a woman named Tigress, the same moniker as a villain of Zatara's as far back in the Golden Age as Action Comics number 1, an identity that went on to be used by Young Justice's Artemis Croc. The T's in Joyride were a street gang led by Fat T. All members had T masks on their faces, visually similar to Mr. Terrific, though I don't think Batman and Mr. Terrific ever threw hands at each other back in the day. The relationship was pretty solid and respectful even in the comics. We've yet to learn if there's any real connection between Terrific and the T's. But for more JLU connections, in the episode Lost Soul, we met Robert Vance, whose digitized soul turned computer program took control of Gotham's online network and eventually downloaded itself into the Batsuit. Vance also had a son, who he learned in JLU's Task Force X was an agent of Cadmus, responsible for letting a certain suicidal squad onto the Watchtower. Mind Games introduced a group of superpowered psychics called the Brain Trust, which included an albino man who we later learned was actually Edgar Mandragora, the son of Stephen Mandragora, who once encountered members of the Justice League in JLU's Double Date. Batman fought the Ratcatcher many times in the comics, first in Detective Comics number 585 from 1988, and now we've got a second Ratcatcher in the Suicide Squad. But Batman Beyond had the episode Rats, which is kind of like the Ratcatcher if you think about it, right?
Rats. Was that your take on the Ratcatcher?
No.
Okay, moving on.
Although Patrick the Rat Boy did return in a much more Ratcatcher-like disfigured form in Batman Beyond Volume 2, number 17. We also saw the present-day Ratcatcher, aka Otis Flanagan, in the BTAC Holiday Special at Harley's Party. But no Ratcatcher 2 in this continuity as of yet. While Terry fought an Invisible Man in the Sneak Peek episode, Bruce did it first, in BTAS's See No Evil. Another headcanon fan theory we subscribe to here at the WDB is that maybe the tech in Lloyd Ventrix's suit served as the basis for the same ability in the Beyond costume. Falseface, who stole the virus for Cobra in the aforementioned Plague, was a callback to the Falseface Society, which traditionally worked for Black Mask, present to fight the animated Batman of the past in Batman Adventures Volume 2 and BTAC Season 2. Falseface was also similar in character concept to the Spider-Man villain Chameleon, at least if you ask me. I guess nobody did, but. During the Call two-parter that featured the JLU of the future, Terry technically battled the Man of Steel, Superman himself, just like Bruce did in World's Finest three-parter, aka the Batman-Superman movie. Well, technically Terry fought Starro in the Call, but also technically Bruce did that too, in Justice League Adventures number 5, and a few other instances you'll know about soon because James will tell you in a more starfishy video. Terry McGinnis encountered a few more villains from Batman's past in tie-in comics and other animated series or shorts. Brainiac Beyond was a nuisance in Superman Adventures number 64, where Terry followed the villain into the past that resulted in a team-up with Superman. Darwin Cook's Batman 75th Anniversary short featured Terry in combat with the assumed hard-act duplicate of Batman, as first seen in BTAS's His Silicon Soul, but now in TMBA style. Kronos the Time Thief from JLU's Once a Future Thing two-parter fought both versions of Batman in their prime during the events of that very episode. And in Epilogue, while keeping most of the episode a secret, we saw a future version of Parasite as part of the Iniquity Collective. Dwayne McDuffie revealed on his forum that the character was referred to as Parasite Beyond in production, implying it was not Rudy Jones, the original Parasite from Superman's Rogues, who personally fought Batman in the opening of JLU's Clash episode. Amanda Waller, who also had conflict with the Justice League in the Project Cadmus story arc, also was a main character in Epilogue, though as a dotty old lady. She later appeared in the Batman Beyond Hush Beyond miniseries set on Earth 12, where she still had access to Cadmus tech, and worked alongside a scientist named Thawne, presumably an ancestor of Professor Zoom. Needless to say, another villain in that miniseries was Hush. LOL. Terry describes the new villain pretty thoroughly in issue number 3. They're calling him Hush. At first it was because he told his intended victims to hush, but it also fits because, like the first guy to use the name, his plan involves Batman villains, mine and Bruce Wayne's. In this case, his plan is killing them, like he wants to do to the Calendar Man here. You pussy! Julian Day never appeared in the DCAU himself, not outside this obviously non-canon miniseries, but there was a lady variation named Calendar Girl featured in TMBA's Mean Seasons episode. Another villain who was murdered by Hush Beyond was the Signal Man, who first appeared in Batman number 112 from 1957, using the signs, signals, and symbols that ruled society as the motif behind his crimes, though never had a proper inclusion on screen in the DC animated universe. The miniseries went on to introduce a new Catwoman for the Beyond era, who was eventually revealed to be the teleporting daughter of the Firestorm villain Multiplex, as well as a new Matter Master named Carson Jetts, who appeared in issue number 1 of Batman Beyond Volume 4. Though the original Matter Master, traditionally a Hawkman foe, was Mark Mandrill, who briefly fought Metamorpho in issue number 31 of the Justice League Unlimited tie-in comic. Batman Beyond and Justice League Beyond were given 2.0 series, which returned several other supervillains from Batman's past, including Kirk Langstrom, aka Man-Bat, the very first BTAS baddie from On Leather Wings, as well as the Justice Lords from Justice League's A Better World two-parter, Brainiac again, this time with the help of Jaxer, and the Phantasm from the classic Batman Mask of the Phantasm animated movie. The 2.0 series ended once DC Editorial declared that it was time for Batman Beyond to enter the mainstream comics universe during the New 52's Future's End event, which saw Terry McGinnis fight and die to save the world from Brother Eye, the evil artificial intelligence satellite that Batman notoriously had a hand in creating, as initially revealed in the OMAC Project miniseries. Long story short, Terry McGinnis eventually came back to life in time for DC Rebirth, where he got a new ongoing series and saw him face a new version of the Scarecrow, as well as the actual return of the Joker. Terry even kind of clashed with people like Booster Gold. I'm sure I'll have more to say about all that stuff in a future video, but what I really want to know now is, which villains from Batman's past would you have liked to see reappear for Beyond who didn't make the cut? Leave us a comment below, let us know your thoughts. As usual, I want to thank our Patreon supporters. Check us out at patreon.com/DCAU Watchtower, see all the cool tiers like early access to videos, live hangouts, custom artwork, and much more. We also stream live here on YouTube throughout the week with book readings, video games, whatever we feel like. Another reminder, hit that subscribe button and join the Patreon page so you don't miss any upcoming videos and more from the Watchtower Database.